Hey guys, Clay back again. I'm here to react to some of your responses as to what would be a controversial topic you would like to see made into a movie. So, this is what you responded: US oppression, Japanese concentration camps, etc. You had to start with the US hate already, did you? So, this person is talking about the concentration camps that the US had back in World War II when the Japanese attacked us with Pearl Harbor, and that's when the US started to put all the Japanese citizens in America into concentration camps. So it's pretty much painting a picture especially during World War II when we thought everything was black and white. There was good and there was evil, but in reality it wasn't. There was a lot of gray areas back in those days. Everybody had concentration camps. Most countries back then had it. It wasn't just Germany, it was Russia, Japan, Italy, even the US. There's even a movie about that. It's called Come See the Paradise. I saw that way back a few years ago. This US American that marries a Japanese woman and then she's taken away from him after Pearl Harbor to these concentration camps. As far as I know, during those concentration camps, they treated them as humanely as possible, but once they were trying to escape, that's when they would kill them. But of course, the only reason that we put so much emphasis to the Holocaust in Germany was because not only of how unhumane they were treated, but also because America back then, they were very friendly with the Soviets, even though they had their own concentration camps. A movie about Jeffrey Epstein and his island, all the people involved in his pedophiliac ring. Oh, that's a very interesting one. You know, I don't think it would be a movie they are ready to make because of all the celebrities that were involved with Jeffrey Epstein. Now, I don't believe that people like Tom Hanks or Oprah were involved in that pedophiliac ring when once they released a whole list of famous people that were involved with him, like Steven Spielberg and all. I don't believe most of them were involved in that pedophiliac ring. But I think it would be hard for them because of how these actors were so involved with, or how he was involved with them financially. And so I think it would be easier for them to make a movie about Harvey Weinstein or Donald Trump as being rapist. And if they ever made a Jeffrey Epstein movie, it would bring the most obvious ones: Prince Charles, Kevin Spacey, the Clintons. But last year they released a Netflix show called Jeffrey Epstein Filthy Rich, and they just show him to be a monster. They show him how of a sociopath, how much of a narcissistic and like a just unrepentant person he really was in real life. But how would you do it in a narrative perspective? Would you do it as flashbacks after he committed suicide or assassinated, whatever you think? Or would you do it from his point of view or the victim's point of view? If they can show something that we don't know or confirm something that we still have doubts about, that would be interesting. I'm gonna piggyback this. Pizzagate. Oh, now that's a fun one, especially with what we're going through right now. For those of you who don't know, Pizzagate was something that happened back in 2016 during the elections with Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. This was pretty much about this conspiracy that Hollywood and the world leaders are run by pedophiles and devil worshippers, and they were sacrificing children to be immortal, to be younger, and they would drink their blood. And so right now with what you have with QAnon, it's something that has evolved over these few years because of the elections. And back then, related to the Pizzagate, there was this belief that these kids were being hostage inside of a pizza restaurant, and some guy believed it, and he made a whole spectacle. It became news media worthy because of how that guy believed that there were children locked up in a pizza restaurant because of Hillary Clinton during the election time. I mean, I think you could link Pizzagate with QAnon, especially right now, for how big of this conspiracy has grown eventually. Because I remember last year during the elections with Joe Biden, where I was starting to see in my Facebook feedbacks about children being sacrificed to movie actors, to politicians, that Joe Biden is a pedophile, that they're devil worshippers, and And I was thinking, where did this come from? Like, now I'm not denying that there are some creeps in the Hollywood system. I mean, most of the Goonies back in the 80s got molested, and their story didn't come out until the early 2000s, and nobody raised an eyebrow on that. So why all of a sudden do we care that Hollywood is, being molesting children or being a pedophile or sex trafficking them? And it has to do because of the elections. It's not about the children. That is, if you want to manipulate somebody, if you want to bring them to your circle, the only thing you gotta throw is the "for your children's" card, and you've already poked a sensitive spot that, of course, nobody can deny the fact that we want to keep our children safe. The killing of Nipsey Hussle. He's a rapper from California. He was shot and killed in LA because supposedly the government had something to do with the shooter. Before you told me this, I didn't know who this guy was until I looked into his history, and he's a very interesting guy. He was a rapper who was very involved with his own community in LA. He wasn't just singing about what it's normally sang with rappers today about sex, drugs, and twerking and sex. Did I just say sex twice? Well, I guess you gotta have sex during morning and at night, I guess. He was a very motivational presence for his community, and he was almost becoming like a political figure at that time during the Donald Trump era. So this whole conspiracy about who killed this rapper was he killed by his gang members, or was he actually killed by the government because of how he was gaining sort of a political presence at that time? I guess it goes back to the police brutality in LA, because when you hear the people that live in LA talk about Hussle, the ones that knew him, it's a very touchy subject for them. It's not for us, people that didn't know him or don't live over there, but for that community, it is a very touchy subject. Aside of involving gang members, it also involves the police department in LA, and that has a notorious reputation of being considered as one of the most corrupted police departments in the US. I recommend you a movie about the corruption of the LA department. It's called LA Confidential. It's like a neo-noir film that pretty much shows how corrupted the police department is in that during the 50s and even to this day, pretty much. So I guess it would have to focus pretty much on either with his involvement with gang members and also with police brutality, and I think that's something that Hollywood would love, especially right now. American History X. It had a lot of stereotypes, and the racism of that movie was just crazy. Even if it was fictional, the movie itself, it felt like it was something was filmed, and nobody who was acting was a real actor. And especially that curb stomp to the poor guy was just sad and very graphic. Yes, I remember that scene. It was horrific to watch. I think you're talking about the portrayal of the skinhead community and how American History X is that one movie that represents them. And yeah, and while it is fictional, it does show how somebody would give in to those ideologies, how somebody would be seduced to believing in those causes. Your ideologies don't need to make sense as long as you're quick wit and sound like you believe them. Then somebody who doesn't know any better, like the younger brother, for example, who listens to the biased political talk of his skinhead brother, then that kid will listen to those type of talks and will listen to them for how convinced that person is, and he will buy into that. So I guess it would show how easy it is to manipulate someone who doesn't know any better by someone who as well doesn't know any better and is blinded by his own ideology of hate. I would like to see a movie about the Hollywood Blacklist, but instead of portraying the communists as heroes, I would like to see them portrayed as villains. Contrary to popular belief, the Hollywood Blacklist was not black and white issue. Now, should people have been fired for being members of the community party? Absolutely not. But describing the entire thing as a witch hunt is far from the truth. At one point, I thought the same thing, but after doing some research, I realized that there were far more communists in Hollywood than people realized. Okay, I'm gonna stop there because it's pretty long response, but that was something I was not expecting. This is talking about the McCarthy era, also known as the Red Scare, during the 50s. It took place after World War II was over, and the alliance between Russia and the United States became toxic, and that's when Cold War started, and America became so paranoid about communist spies in their land that they started to interview people, especially Hollywood actors who they thought they were putting subliminal communist messages in their films, and so Hollywood became affected so severely that there were 10,000 of actors that were blacklisted, meaning they couldn't have a job. They could no longer work in Hollywood, and they were considered as communist. Like Charlie Chaplin was blacklisted. Orson Welles, the actor and director for Citizen Kane, he was blacklisted, and God knows how many other actors and directors as well. And this was done by Senator back then, Joseph McCarthy, who pushed this paranoia of communism in America, and there was so much fear on on immigrants invading our land, or the American land, and that's why it became such a controversial, a big issue back in the 50s, because it was invading the First Amendment right for freedom of speech. Because if you had modern art, you would be suspected of communist. If you had, I don't know, portraits of immigrants or pictures, or if you had immigrant friends, you would be considered as a communist. Pretty much, if you had left-wing ideologies, you would be labeled as a communist, and you would be blacklisted, and either you would go to jail or you would no longer work anymore. That's why the 50s in Hollywood especially was considered a very conservative but a very toxic environment as well. So from the past years who have spoken about the Red Scare, the McCarthy era, it's been pretty easy to make the victims, the Hollywood victims, as the good people and McCarthy as the villain. So I don't know if that would be the move right now to go. I mean, right now I think it would be okay, because right now there's this fear once again about communism, especially with what went through in our last election with Joe Biden being accused of communism and blah 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 blah. But if you place the victims as the villains, then who do you have to root for in a narrative standpoint? Because of course you're not gonna have the Republican Senate at that time to be interpreted as, as the good guys, I guess, especially McCarthy, because he was known. History has recognized him to be not a good person. He's pretty much reviled in history for satirizing the facts back then, when most of the things he would say didn't make any sense, or they were just made up. So for people who study film, it would be an interesting recap in a modern time like this, especially with how communism is returning back again into our topic of discussion. But again, in a narrative standpoint, I don't know who would you have as someone you can root for if everybody there is a villain. And like you said, it could be that not everything was black and white. Like you said, there were many actors, there were few actors that were blacklisted, but that doesn't mean that they were evil or some sort. It just means that they didn't have a traditional conservative mindset. It was more like a liberal. But yeah, that is a very good choice. Are Marvel movies not cinema? Well, I don't think that's too controversial enough to make a movie about it. It's more of an opinion that's pretty much not popular right now, especially for how popular superhero films are today. This was said after Endgame was released in 2019, and so the guy who said it was Martin Scorsese, a very well-known director who has a great resume of film directing, as for Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, the Departure, The Goodfellas, Casino, and Wolf of Wall Street, and what else has he done? Oh, and The Irish. And so he's coming from an old school style of cinema, which I can respect where he's coming from, because I think he looks at it as from a cinematic standpoint. Back then during the 30s, 50s, 40s, whatever decade, the visuals, the styles of filmmaking, they were much raw, they were real. Something that in our modern day, in especially in the Marvels, in any superhero film, there's more special effects, there's more CGI, there's green screens, and when compared to back then, there was something real about those films. Like you look at the Akira Kurosawa films with Seven Samurai, or the Italian films with Eight and a Half, or any other film from the classics, and they look astonishing. Even to this day, to our standards, they look astonishing because you know they are real, and whenever they had great photographic cinematography, it looked impressive by that time. And today, it's pretty much done in a green screen wall, and while it's not there, it's not there actually, but it doesn't mean it doesn't look good on the screen. So he can have his opinion about superheroes, and I'll still look at them as part of cinema because they did leave a big impact in cinema. So those are the responses I got. I will keep making these type of videos, and don't forget that tune in next time. I'll be doing my comparison of Lord of the Rings and the Justice League Zack Snyder version. Until then, see you next time.